I still remember the first time Sarah dug her hands into the dirt behind our little white house on Willow Bend Lane. The doctors had just given us the news. Stage 3. Breast cancer. Aggressive. I was numb. She wasn't. She looked me dead in the eye that afternoon, hands trembling from chemo fatigue, and said, "I want to grow something. I need to." At first, I didn't understand. We had a decent backyard. The HOA insisted on perfect lawns and ornamental shrubs that looked like they came out of a catalog. But nothing personal. Nothing real. But Sarah had different plans. She spent hours sketching layouts, deciding what to plant. Lavender, daisies, tulips, tomatoes, even some wildflowers from her childhood home in Vermont. It wasn't about vegetables or aesthetics. It was about life. About putting something beautiful into the world while cancer tried to take everything from her. She named the garden Hope. I built her raised beds from reclaimed wood and painted each one a soft pastel color she liked. When she lost her hair, I watched her sit outside in the sun with her scarf fluttering in the breeze, watering every plant like it was a sacred act. "I feel alive out here," she'd whisper. Even on the bad days. And there were bad days. Days when she couldn't eat. Days she couldn't speak through the nausea or the pain. I would carry her outside in a blanket just so she could see the flowers. Her hands were always so cold, but she'd smile. Every single time. Our neighbors noticed. Some waved. A few dropped off seedlings. But not everyone was kind, especially not the HOA board. The first letter came 2 weeks after we put in a small wooden trellis for her climbing roses. I opened it while she was asleep on the couch, curled up in one of my old sweaters. Violation of community landscaping code. Unauthorized structural elements in the backyard area. Must be removed within 14 days to avoid penalties. It didn't seem real. I crumpled it and tossed it. I told myself they didn't understand. If they knew what she was going through, they'd look the other way. I was wrong, but at the time I didn't tell her. I couldn't. She had enough to carry. So I handled it. I sent them a letter, explained everything. I even attached a photo of her in the garden, scarf tied around her head, smile wide as she pointed to the first bloom of her peonies. No reply. Then came a fine. $75. Then another. $150. Still, I didn't tell her. She was tired, but she kept gardening. Some days, it was the only thing she could do, but it gave her something to wake up for. She planted little signs near each flower that said things like, "Still growing, not done yet," and "One day at a time." I watched her make peace with pain in that garden. I watched her hum old songs while pruning basil. I watched her cry quietly when one of her sunflowers drooped too soon, and the HOA just kept sending letters. One afternoon, when I came back from picking up her medication, I found her lying on the ground near the petunias. She had passed out. Her blood pressure was too low. At the hospital, as they stabilized her, she clutched my hand and asked, "Did the garden get watered?" That's the kind of heart she had. I remember breaking down in the parking lot that night. My hands shook as I read another letter from the HOA on my phone. "This is your final warning. The unauthorized modifications must be removed immediately. That garden was keeping her alive, and they wanted to rip it out like it was just weeds. But still, I didn't tell her. Not yet. Instead, I doubled down. I stayed up late fixing the borders around the beds. I printed out documentation from her oncologist. I begged the board for an exemption, and still, silence. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have just told Sarah. She would have understood, or maybe she wouldn't have. Maybe it would have broken her spirit. That's what I feared most. Because in that backyard, surrounded by blossoms and soil, she wasn't a patient. She wasn't dying. She was living. And no rulebook should have had the power to take that away. The letter that finally broke me came on a Monday. It was folded neatly in a white HOA envelope, slipped into our mailbox like it was nothing, like it wasn't a bomb waiting to go off. Your property remains in violation of the neighborhood landscaping standards. The current layout, including raised beds, trellises, non-compliant color schemes, and unapproved floral arrangements, does not meet the standards of community aesthetics as outlined in the HOA bylaws. You have 10 days to bring your yard into compliance, or the HOA reserves the right to take corrective action. Community aesthetics. They use that phrase like a shield, like a way to sanitize cruelty with paperwork. It wasn't a backyard to them. It was a checkbox. And because Sarah's garden didn't look like the bland hedges and store-bought mulch they deemed acceptable, they wanted it gone. That evening, she was sitting in the middle of the garden on a small bench we built together, wearing her favorite yellow beanie. The scarf days were over. Her hair hadn't come back yet, but she didn't care. The beanie was soft and had little embroidered bees on it. She looked beautiful in it, even though her skin was pale and her frame too thin. She waved me over, her smile barely hiding the exhaustion in her eyes. "The zinnias bloom today," she said softly. "They're pink, just like I hoped." I sat beside her, holding the letter behind my back like it was some poisonous thing. Because it was. I didn't want to tell her. I still hadn't. I kept thinking I could fight this on my own, that I could make it go away quietly. I didn't want her to see that the very people who should have shown empathy were treating her sanctuary like a violation. But 10 days wasn't long, and I was running out of options. I went to the next HOA meeting. I stood in front of a small group of people, 5 board members seated at a long table, papers stacked, glasses perched, dressed like they were running a Fortune 500 company instead of micromanaging a suburban neighborhood. I brought pictures. I brought a letter from Sarah's doctor. I even brought a bouquet from the garden. "I'm not asking for a favor," I told them, voice shaking. "I'm asking for compassion. That garden, it's not a landscaping choice. It's keeping my wife alive." There was silence. Then a woman with stiff posture and a fake smile replied, "We understand it's emotional, but we have to be fair to all residents. If we allow one property to deviate from the rules, it sets a precedent." Precedent. That word hit me like a punch. They didn't care. Not really. They saw her illness as an inconvenience, and her garden as a breach of uniformity. I left that meeting with clenched fists and tear-filled eyes. 2 days later, I finally told Sarah. I sat her down, wrapped in a blanket, the smell of rosemary, and dirt surrounding us, and I told her everything. About the letters, the fines, the meeting, the deadline. She didn't get angry. She got quiet. She looked around her garden, at the little wooden signs, the climbing vines, the flowers she planted, with trembling hands, and tears filled her eyes. She pressed her palm to her mouth, trying to hold it in. But she couldn't, and neither could I. She cried in my arms that night. She sobbed like a child while whispering over and over, "Why would they do this? Why can't they just let me have this?" I didn't have an answer. We spent the next few days trying to prepare for the worst. I told her I'd fight it, that I'd sue them if I had to. But even as I said the words, I felt the hopelessness creeping in. We didn't have time for legal battles. We barely had energy for daily life. Sarah started spending less time in the garden. I could see the weight of the situation draining her. Her hands, once so eager to dig and plant, trembled now with frustration. It was like watching her slowly fade before my eyes. And then, one morning, just 5 days before the deadline, she did something I didn't expect. She went out there and began writing letters, not to the board, to our neighbors. Handwritten, notes, each one personal, raw, and honest. She told them about her illness, about the garden, about how much it meant to her, and how the HOA wanted to take it away. She handed them to me, eyes fierce beneath her beanie. "Deliver these," she said. "Let's see if they care." I did. One by one, I knocked on doors, handed out letters, told Sarah's story. And to my surprise, people listened. Some cried, some hugged me. Some said they had no idea what she was going through. A few had lost loved ones to cancer themselves. The next evening, candles began appearing on our lawn. Notes of encouragement, flowers. Neighbors we barely knew began to stop by just to say, "We're with you." A group of them even confronted the HOA board, demanding the enforcement be paused, if not dropped completely. But the board didn't bend. Not then. The deadline stayed in place. The day before it hit, we received one last notice, a formal warning, printed in cold. Failure to comply will result in immediate corrective landscaping by the HOA maintenance team. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. We just held each other, That garden was more than a piece of land. It was her soul poured into the earth, and someone was coming to tear it out in the name of aesthetics. I sat outside the next morning as the sun came up, just waiting. For the trucks, for the men in gloves and vests. I had no idea what I'd do if they showed. But when the sound of tires came rumbling down the street, they weren't HOA trucks. They were our neighbors. Dozens of them, holding signs, standing shoulder to shoulder in our yard, blocking the way. One woman handed me a thermos of coffee and whispered, "We're not letting them touch it." And just like that, we weren't alone anymore. I wish I could tell you that the neighborhood standing with us that day changed everything. That it made the HOA back down. That compassion won. But this isn't one of those stories. Not yet. It started just after 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. The sun was high. Sarah was inside, too tired to stand, and I was pacing in the kitchen when I heard the sound of tires again. This time, it was them. 3 white pickup trucks with the HOA's maintenance contractor name stenciled on the side. Men in uniforms stepped out, holding trimmers, shovels, a wheelbarrow, and thick black trash bags. I ran outside. "You can't do this," I shouted, heart racing. "She's sick. She has cancer. She's in there, resting." One of the workers looked at me, sympathetic. "I'm sorry, sir. We're just following orders. You can take it up with the board." Neighbors came out again. A few stood between the workers and the yard. One woman, Elaine from down the street, started crying. She kept repeating, "This isn't right. This isn't who we are." But the workers made calls. The HOA president, his name was Paul Langston, a man I'd barely spoken more than 2 words to, showed up 10 minutes later, walking with his chest out like he owned the street. "Mr. Langston," I pleaded, "please, my wife is inside. She's fighting for her life. This garden, this is her fight." He shook his head with a practiced politician's sigh. "I sympathize truly. But this neighborhood has standards. If we let this slide, we lose consistency. We have to maintain property values. I have to think about the whole community." That was the moment I realized he didn't see us. Not really. Not as people. He saw a file folder with our name on it, a line item on his desk, and then he gave the signal. The workers stepped around the neighbors. Some hesitated, others didn't. They began ripping out Sarah's flowers one by one. Tulips, gone. Marigolds, gone. The rosemary bush she grew. From a seed, gone. I ran inside. I couldn't let her see, but when I opened the door, I found her already at the window. She had seen everything. She was crying. Silent tears, her face hollow, her eyes wide and stunned. I can't," she whispered. "I can't watch this." She turned away and curled into a ball on the couch. I wrapped a blanket around her and held her, my own tears falling on her shoulder. "They're taking it," she said, voice cracking. "They're taking the only thing I had left." I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the bylaws out of Langston's hands and shove them into the dirt he'd just desecrated. But all I could do was sit there, powerless. From the window, I watched them pull up the raised beds I built. They yanked the little painted signs she wrote her affirmations on. Still growing. Hope lives here. Hope. They bagged it. They threw it away. The garden was gone in under 2 hours. The neighbors who stayed behind looked defeated. Some tried to stop them. Some yelled. A few recorded it on their phones. But it didn't matter. The board had the legal right, and they used it like a weapon. By noon, the backyard was just dirt. I went out after they left. I walked barefoot through what was left. Splinters of wood, crushed petals, a single daisy head that had fallen from the pile but remained. On the grass. I picked it up and carried it inside. Sarah was asleep by then, exhausted from crying. I placed the daisy in a little glass cup of water next to her and sat by her side until night fell. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor next to her and stared at the ceiling. I didn't know what to do. Because this wasn't just about flowers. This was about dignity. About the one thing she had left to nurture while her own body betrayed her. About peace. And now, it was gone. The next morning, something had changed in her. She didn't get up for the garden. She didn't ask about the weather. She didn't speak. She just stared out the window at the bare dirt patch and let the silence fill the space where Joy used to live. The following week, she had to go back into the hospital. Her white blood cell count had dropped dangerously low, and her spirit. It was like it had been dug out of her along with the soil. The nurses were kind. They let me decorate her room with some artificial flowers. I brought her photos of the garden from better days, but it wasn't the same. I just wanted to leave something beautiful behind, she told me one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Something alive. I held her hand. You did. You still can. She looked away. Not here. Not with people like them running the world. That hurt more than I can explain. Because I realized she no longer believed in people. In neighbors. In the idea that kindness could win. And all because a group of people in a boardroom valued uniform grass over human grace. She stayed in the hospital for 3 more days. When she came home, she didn't even look out the window. She went straight to bed. I tried everything to lift her spirits. I made her favorite soup. I brought her books. I even ordered a lavender candle that smelled like the flowers she once grew. But she was shrinking. Not just in her body, but in her soul. And all I could think was, they did this. Not the cancer. The people who decided that aesthetics mattered more than her happiness. And in that quiet, painful stretch of days, something inside me broke too. Only, what broke inside me didn't make me give up. It made me angry. And that anger began to burn like wildfire, because if Sarah couldn't fight anymore, then I would. The day Sarah passed was quiet. No machines beeped. No doctors rushed in. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. It was just me, her, and the soft hum of the air purifier in the corner of the hospice room. Her hand in mine. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slow, then slower. And then, nothing. I sat there for a long time. I didn't cry right away. Not because I wasn't devastated, I was. But because something in me went still. Numb. Like someone had hit the mute button on the world. The silence was heavy. Total. It was the kind of silence that leaves you hollow. I remember looking out the window and wondering why the sun had the nerve to rise that morning. Back home, her pillow still held the shape of her head. Her tea mug was still by the sink, lipstick faint on the rim. And the backyard, the place where she found peace, was still just a patch of dirt. That night, I stood in the middle of it. My feet bare, the cold earth beneath me. I could feel her, absence pressing against my chest like a hand that wouldn't let go. And then I fell to my knees. I broke. Finally. Violently. Loud sobs poured out of me, ugly and raw. I screamed into the empty yard like it owed me something. Like maybe if I screamed loud enough, the universe would hear me. Maybe it would rewind time. Maybe it would give me back what the HOA had stolen. But nothing answered. No neighbors. No stars. Just me and that cursed patch of ground. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on. But I couldn't. Her funeral was small, just the way she wanted. Her yellow beanie was in the casket with her, along with a small pouch of her garden soil. I'd saved, just a handful, but sacred to me. The pastor read a poem about flowers and peace and rebirth, and I stood there gripping the folded funeral program like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. After that, people stopped visiting. The meals stopped showing up at my door. The condolences became fewer and fewer, and eventually, it was just me again. But grief. Grief is a strange thing. It starts like a weight you can't lift. But after a while, it mutates. Becomes something else, a kind of fuel. And one morning, I woke up with a thought that refused to leave my head. They don't get to win, not like this. I pulled out every letter the HOA had sent, every email, every photo of the garden. I gathered everything into a binder, labeled it Sarah's Garden, the fight they started. And I began writing. I wrote our story, every detail. From her diagnosis to the joy she found in the soil to the day they ripped it all away. I wrote about the meeting, the letters, the looks of indifference, and the president with the permanent smirk who said, "We have to think about the whole community." I sent it to the local news, then the regional papers. I posted on forums, On neighborhood pages, on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, anywhere I could. And people began to notice. One post went viral, then another. Soon I was getting messages from strangers across the country. Cancer survivors, grieving husbands, even former HOA members who said, "This isn't how it's supposed to work." The story hit a nerve. One morning, I woke up to find a reporter on my front lawn. We did the interview right where her garden used to be. I told them about the rosemary, about the affirmations, about her tears as they tore it all out. The piece aired the following week, and it lit a fire. People rallied. A petition demanding the resignation of the HOA president gained thousands of signatures. A local councilwoman contacted me and said, "This story broke my heart. Let's make it mean something." Suddenly, the board was under pressure. I received a letter. This one very different in tone. Formal, but shaking beneath the surface. "We regret the distress caused by prior actions and are reviewing current policies to ensure greater sensitivity and enforcement moving forward." I didn't care about their regret. It was too late for that. But then came the invitation. A special HOA meeting, open to the public. They wanted to address concerns. I went. Not to yell, not to plead, but to stand. I brought photos of Sarah, of the garden, of the people who stood with us. I didn't prepare a speech. I just spoke. She gave this neighborhood everything, I told them. She brought life and beauty to a square of earth. And instead of protecting her, you destroyed the only thing that made her smile during the worst months of her life. All in the name of uniformity. The room was silent. Neighbors stood. One by one they backed me up, told their own stories, called out the board for its coldness. By the end, people were clapping, crying, and Langston, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. He resigned 2 days later. They offered to let me rebuild the garden. But it wasn't about planting flowers anymore. It was about what the garden stood for: freedom, dignity, peace in the face of pain. And I wanted something bigger. So I asked for one thing: a memorial. A permanent garden open to all residents, built right in the center of the community. A space for healing, for remembering, for planting hope. I offered to pay for half of it, myself, and they agreed. Construction began the following spring, and on the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's passing, we dedicated the space in her name. A plaque beneath a blooming cherry tree reads, "Sarah's Garden, a place to grow, to grieve, and to begin again." People come there now, to sit, to plant, to remember. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the rosemary and the zinnias, I swear I can hear her laugh. There's something poetic about watching a seed bloom in the very ground that once held so much pain. It's been a year since we opened Sarah's garden to the community. I walk there almost every morning now, coffee in hand, wearing the old flannel she always said made me look cozy and tired. She was right about that, like she was right about most things. The garden has grown, both literally and figuratively. There's a stone path that winds through beds of lavender, marigolds, and roses. The cherry tree in the center is taller than I thought it would be by now. Maybe trees grow faster when they're planted with love and watered with tears. I don't know. I'm not a poet, but sometimes I feel her there in the breeze, in the hush of petals brushing against each other like whispered memories. A little girl was here last week, kneeling by a raised bed with her mother. She was planting snapdragons. "This one's for my daddy," she said. "He passed away last Christmas. He used to love these." I didn't say anything, just nodded and kept walking. But my chest ached in that same spot where it always does when I see someone finding peace in the garden. Her garden. Because that's what it is now. Not mine. Not the HOA's. Not even Sarah's, really. It belongs to everyone who's ever needed. A quiet place to remember someone they love. And it never should have taken a war to create it. I think back often to those first few months after she died, when I was swallowed up in grief, anger, and guilt. Guilt that I hadn't done more. Guilt that I couldn't protect her, not just from the cancer, but from the cruelty of bureaucracy and blind rule following. But now I see that standing up, after, was a form of protection too. I couldn't shield her in time, but I could honor her. I could make sure no one else had to suffer the way she did. Had their small joy bulldozed by people more concerned with uniform hedges than with human hearts. There's a bench in the garden with her name carved into the wood. On it, a quote I chose from one of her favorite books. "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." Sarah believed in tomorrow, even when the doctors told her she might not have one. She believed in beauty, in peace, in kindness, and she believed, perhaps stubbornly, that even when the world was cruel, it could be nudged back toward good. That's the lesson that won't be forgotten, because it wasn't just a story about flowers. It was a story about what we choose to value, and who we choose to stand up for. The HOA has changed since then. There are new board members now, people who understand that compassion isn't a threat to property values. They've revised their enforcement policies to include exceptions for medical hardship, and they've added a clause that requires the board to consider emotional and therapeutic value when reviewing landscaping disputes. Small things, maybe, but they matter, and I think that's what Sarah would have wanted. Not revenge, not punishment. Just a little more humanity. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at a nearby HOA conference. They'd heard about the story, most of them had seen it online, and they wanted to learn from it. I stood in front of a crowd of board members, policy writers, and legal consultants, and I told them what happened. I showed them pictures of Sarah before she got sick, of the garden in full bloom, of what was taken, and what we built in its place. I didn't yell, I didn't blame, I just asked one question. When you look at someone's front yard, do you see a violation or a story? The room was quiet for a long time after that, and that was enough. Because change starts with listening. There's a photo I keep in my wallet now. It's worn and folded at the edges. It shows Sarah sitting on a garden stool, wearing that yellow beanie, dirt on her cheek, smiling like she just solved all the world's problems with a trowel and a packet of seeds. When I feel lost, I look at that photo and I remember. I remember that love is action, that grief can be fuel, that even in the darkest moments there's something worth growing, worth defending, worth leaving behind. And I remember that one voice, quiet, trembling, angry, determined, can ripple out further than we ever imagine. So to anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone wondering if they have the strength to fight back when the world seems indifferent, you do. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not in the way you think. But sometimes, fighting back doesn't look like a protest or a lawsuit. Sometimes it looks like planting a single flower in a place where someone told you no. And doing it anyway, because beauty is a form of defiance. And Sarah, she was the most beautiful rebel I've ever known.